The story is set in Java back in 2003, and it all kicks off by showing you this group of workers who are about to start their very first day at a sugar factory. They're all crammed together in an old truck, that's their ride, patiently squashing in just so they can make it to the factory before they're late. And let's introduce, one by one, those new workers. There is Andrianto with a slightly short build. Next to him there is Frankie, with a build that's a bit bigger than the others, the tall and slightly snobbish beauty named Naning. Enda, who is calm, not very talkative but still charming. Fadil, a young man who is devout in his religion, polite and kind-hearted. Hendra and Wati, a soon-to-be married couple who are forced to work at the sugar factory because they have to prepare money for the dowry, the party expenses and so on. Long story short, they arrived at the factory in question, where they were immediately lined up to receive directions from the lady, the manager of the factory, their rights and obligations as factory workers, as well as the rules, anything that must not be violated while working there. Wati, Enda and Naning were in the same lodge, or what could be called a dorm, which was still located in the factory area. And besides them, there was one more worker, from a different village, but placed in the same lodge named Rani, where they immediately introduced themselves to each other and committed to taking care of each other, looking after and advising one another as a form of friendship bond among fellow workers. In another lodge, more precisely the lodge for the men, Fadil, who was about to do the Isha prayer, instead encountered a terrifying figure right when he was about to lay out his prayer mat. Back at the women's lodge, Enda, who was drinking at that moment, accidentally saw a quick flash of a black shadow outside the lodge and assumed that it was Rani. Of course, as a good friend, Enda immediately went after her and watched what Rani was actually going to do. Slowly but surely, Enda followed Rani from behind until entering the factory, which he said should not be entered at night. And after surrounding the factory and not finding Rani anywhere, Enda decided to return, without realizing if not far from where he stood, there was a creepy white figure began to follow him from behind. On the way back, that easy to hear the sound of the show in one of the rooms, which should not be there, especially until there is a show, and because she felt curious, Enda decided to peek from a hollow wall that apparently there is a puppet show in that place, had daydreamed by turning his head and removing his gaze from the show. Enda, who turned back to the show, even surprised by a scene like this. The next day, or rather the day, the first for new workers to work, Enda asked Naning and Wati whether last night anyone came out of the watch or not. And because no one came out, then Enda chose to stop the conversation, because indeed if told, fear will only interfere with their work. Before work, the managers again emphasized what she had said yesterday about some of the rules in this factory, explaining about the alarm that will sound twice, right after sunset at 9 p.m, where at sunset time, it is a yellow light that, indicating if the workers must immediately enter each watch. And 9 p.m. is a red light that indicates if the workers, it is strictly forbidden to leave the watch. I don't know why the mother imposed a curfew, but certainly if any of them violate, then the sanctions will be very severe. Finally, the manager will attend the workers to work. with their respective foremen, where Enda gets the trust to work directly under the guidance of the lady in the manager's room by recording all the important things that are in this factory.
Kamu ikut saya ke kantor.
Muhammad Fadil.
Nanti kamu kerjanya di kantor saya.
The men began to harvest sugarcane from the fields because 3 more days would be done milling, which in less than 1 day they managed to harvest some emplang, which indeed the harvest must be finished before the grinding period arrived. When she was going to the office, she accidentally saw a little white bird, who knows what kind, was lying helpless because it fell from its nest. Of course, the kind too took the time to help the bird back to its nest. The woman named Lady Gina, seeing the kindness of Enda, Lady Gina, who's a paranormal, said to Enda that good deeds will bring good things too, and she immediately left after saying that. During the break, Frankie and Andrianto were telling their respective groups a rumor that's been going around this factory. The story goes that 7 years ago, there was a massive fire here that resulted in mass casualties. Apparently, a group of workers were getting drunk in one of the factory warehouses and somehow the door suddenly got locked. A fire started breaking out from who knows where. Because the fire grew bigger and they couldn't get the door open, they all died, burned alive inside the warehouse. Even to this day, their spirits are still haunting the factory. That's actually why the factory put a curfew in place, so workers don't leave the lodge and run into the ghosts of the fire victims, which would obviously be quite traumatizing.
Arwah mereka gentayangan. Ngawur kon. Kok marah? Kok kabur? Takut ya?
While Enda was working at her office, she sensed something odd, and when she looked to her right, she saw this. It was 5:30, so Enda decided to head out. But as she stepped outside, she saw Rani, of all people, walking into the factory alone. Enda went to catch up with her, but Rani just stopped dead in her tracks, started muttering complete nonsense, and then she spun around and started chasing Enda, who was actually...
Tadi malam, Mbak Rani keluar dari loji.
After finishing work, Andrianto and Frankie took the time to play dominoes with 2 security guards named Rano and Carno. While they played, Rano brought up the story of the fire victims from 7 years ago. They continued until it was almost 9 p.m, at which point Rano and Carno told Andrianto and Frankie to hurry up and get back to the lodge before the curfew alarm went off.
Jamnya demit keluyuran.
On the way, Andrianto, being the coward he is, chose to walk in front, while Frankie was behind him. But as soon as the alarm went off, Frankie totally freaked out and bolted, leaving Andrianto behind, who even lost one of his sandals in the chaos. But the worst part was, Frankie actually slammed the lodge door shut, refusing to let Andrianto in, which left him. The next day, Rani was told to take some documents to the weighing station. Not long after that, Enda showed up, carrying an even bigger stack of files than Rani. Of course, Rani felt obligated to help, especially after she found out that some of the documents Enda was holding were also supposed to be delivered to the weighing station. So, Rani insisted a little, asking Enda to give her some of the files so she could take them to the station for her.
Suwun ya, Mbak. Iya, aku duluan ya. Hati-hati ya, Mbak.
Enda, who was helped of course, thanked Rani for helping her, but after they parted, Enda felt a bad feeling right when she saw a transport cart that suddenly moved by itself, and when she looked back, she found Rani was standing in the middle of the tracks behind the truck that was already ready to unload the sugarcane. Whatever Rani was thinking, she instead smiled at Enda as if she was possessed. So Enda, who was scared something might happen to Rani, of course immediately ran to her place. But this is what happens. Enda immediately apologized to the manager for this incident. While she was in a position of being angry, the manager was instead approached by her medium named Mbah Samin to ask that the milling be postponed for now, where that was done to investigate, to make sure whether the incident that happened to Rani was a pure accident or not.
Ngapunten, Mbah. Boten mungkin.
Not wanting there to be any delay that could cause losses, the lady asked Samin and Zina to perform a ritual so that all the problems in the factory would quickly be resolved. So Zina and Samin immediately carried out their ritual by splitting 3 coconuts, where if the inside didn't match the original, then it was certain that all of them would be in danger.
Sing kedaden iku duduk balak biasa.
Bengi iki awak dhewe kudu nyiapno upacara sesembahan.
After returning from the manager's office, Enda was apparently already being waited for by Fadil, who was curious about what actually happened and what Enda actually experienced in this place. Enda told him that since the first day at the sugar factory, she once went out of the lodgings right after the night alarm was sounded, going toward the factory because she was following someone who also left the lodgings. But when she arrived at an abandoned warehouse, Enda instead saw a wayang performance, and she hoped that the accident earlier didn't have anything to do with what Enda saw on the first night staying at the factory.
Saiki awakmu tenang sik. Ojo lali jaga salat mek wudhu.
Just like Jinnah said earlier, she and Samin went to the warehouse to make an offering, placing 2 Lamosin animals and some food in a bamboo tray, then leaving them just like that, hoping that it would accept the offering and would not disturb the activities in the factory anymore like yesterday.
Apa sing awak dhewe aturke diterima.
Entering the lodgings, Enda intended to apologize to Rani, but she didn't do it because her room door was tightly closed. But right a few steps after she passed it, Rani's room door suddenly opened. Of course, Enda immediately went into Rani's room because Enda really intended to apologize, since she still felt guilty about the incident that happened to Rani.
Permisi, Mbak.
When the time was almost showing 9 at night, Naning just realized that Wati was about to deliver food to Hendra. But because the time was getting too tight and Wati hadn't put on her headscarf yet, Naning kindly offered to deliver it to Hendra, while Wati and Enda could just relax inside the lodgings until Naning returned.
Iki mimpi utuh ya.
Not long after being in the lodgings, the night alarm finally sounded, indicating that Naning had to go back immediately. Quickly, Frankie offered his help to take her to the women's lodgings, but because Naning refused, Frankie couldn't do anything and could only watch Naning, who was getting farther and farther away.
Kotor kabel.
Mari ngene alarm jam merah bunyi.
Wes, mari.
Dik, tak anterin ya.
A few meters before entering the lodgings, Naning felt something unusual. Naning tried to turn her head to see what was around there, where she immediately ran as fast as she could before something strange happened to her. The next day, Bah Samin and Jinnah went back into the warehouse and found their offering still whole and untouched. Knowing that their offering was rejected, the 2 of them immediately performed another ritual, hoping that the demon, the guardian of the factory, would accept their offering. While Rano and Karno were getting disturbed through the bucket at the well that was moving around, Fadil instead experienced something even more terrifying, which was being disturbed by a headless ghost while he was sleeping, while the ghost's own head was lying on the right side of Fadil's head. The incident last night made Fadil wake up late for work. In the middle of that commotion, Fadil instead saw the manager lady, Rano, Karno, Bah Samin, and Bah Jinnah also rushing to look into the well. Of course, Fadil was also curious about what they were looking at and what they saw, so he took a moment to look at it too, which turned out to be... Bah Samin, who saw Fadil, asked him so that he wouldn't spread this news to the other workers, so there wouldn't be a mass panic. And because he was still curious, Fadil gathered the courage to ask what actually happened, but instead of answering, Samin instead said that Fadil was not an ordinary person and took him to go meet Bajina, who was currently with the lady manager and the others.
Kamu bukan orang biasa.
Besides Fadil, there was also Enda, who had already been there first. Bajina then held Enda's hand, pressed her pinky finger and asked what she knew, and if not, then Enda would experience an extraordinary pain in that pinky finger.
Jujur saja, biar tidak sakit.
Enda told them that on her first night at the factory, she once went out past curfew, which was clearly very forbidden by the manager. Not without a reason, Enda did that, intending to catch up with someone she considered a friend. As a result, however, after losing the trail and intending to return, Enda instead heard the sound of a performance and took a moment to look, even though it was only for a short while.
Sebenarnya, himbauan jam malam itu supaya buruh-buruh tidak melihat mereka.
Ada pelanggaran yang lebih besar lagi yang kita belum tahu.
Finished with Enda, now it was Fadil's turn to tell his story. On the first night, Fadil dreamed about two mysterious people who came out of the dorm toward the west warehouse. At first, Fadil thought that it was Enda, but because Enda didn't go to the west, it was certain that those two people were someone else.
Malam itu, ya saya pikir yang mimpi saya itu Enda.
Kamu pergi ke gudang barat? Boten, Mbak. Berarti ada dua orang lain yang ke gudang barat.
The West Warehouse, which is basically the most forbidden place in the factory, of course made all the residents very angry, especially because that place is the kingdom of the spirits, and there was a big possibility that the two mysterious people earlier had entered it and made a fatal mistake inside.
Mereka yang membuat kesalahan lebih besar.
Simbah yakin ini ada hubungannya dengan gudang terlarang itu.
Gudang terlarang?
To make sure of what actually happened, Basamin and Gina performed a ritual that no one really knows what it's called. But for sure, Mbah Gina would make Samin unconscious, so that one of the spirits could possess him. And yes, Samin was possessed by one of the spirits and immediately got on the kuda lumping and performed debu, which is something that could be said to be impossible for an ordinary person to do, where Samin went straight to the west warehouse right when Gina snapped her whip. Samin was seen bowing in front of the statue of the Demon Queen, who had her back turned to him. Seeing Fadil and Enda showing curious faces, Gina finally told them that in the past, in this warehouse, accidents often happened, so the factory made an agreement with the Great Queen of the Spirits so they wouldn't disturb each other. Until finally, 7 years ago, there was a group of workers who made a mistake and were punished by being burned in this place by the Great Queen.
Mengikat perjanjian dengan Maharatu agar tidak saling mengganggu.
Samin, who still hadn't moved, said that this time, the ones who entered this place some time ago had made a fatal mistake by damaging the sacred rope that served as the boundary between the Queen's kingdom and the human world. But what was even worse was, they had dared to steal the invisible belongings of the Queen.
Ada perhiasan-perhiasan emas tak kasat mata milik Maharatu. Seseorang mengambilnya.
Kita semua dalam bahaya besar sekarang.
No one knew what happened. The lady manager suddenly experienced something strange, where worms started coming out of her eyes, ears, nose and mouth. So Bahjina immediately told Rano and Karno to take the lady to her house.
Perhiasan yang hilang dari tempat ini kemungkinan diambil oleh dua orang di mimpimu itu. Nggih, Mbak.
In the women's lodging, Nanning was seen entering her room, finding one of the burn victims digging through Nanning's personal belongings, and after she approached, that creature suddenly disappeared and only left a pile of scattered gold. Nanning, of course, immediately put the gold back, but when she was about to leave, the bedroom door suddenly just disappeared. Then... Yes, Hendra came and snapped Nanning out of her fear because she was being surrounded by the burn victims, where Nanning immediately gave that gold to Hendra, so Hendra then immediately took Nanning to return that gold to its place. But
Ini semua kan karena kamu. Hah?
no one knows what they were doing. Wati and Frankie and the others were seen in the same lodging, and not long after, Enda and Fadil came to the women's lodging and found a gold bracelet lying in front of the lodging, where Wati and the others, who saw the arrival of Fadil and Enda, of course immediately followed them to ask what was actually happening right now.
Ojo, Hendra mbek Nanning pelakone.
The absence of Hendra and Nanning of course made Enda and the others curious about where the two of them had gone, and because Hendra and Nanning weren't there, Enda became suspicious that they were the ones who did it, that all the strange events happening here were because someone stole this. Wati, who felt confused by what Enda said, was finally given an explanation that Nanning and Hendra had made a big mistake, which made the spirits very angry. Even so, Wati still didn't believe it, because according to her, Hendra would never do something that cruel.
Kamu nuduh Mas Hendra mbek Nanning sing nyuri ndak?
Finally, Fadil divided the tasks to look for where Hendra and Nanning were. For now, Enda and Wati would go to the warehouse to meet Mbah Gina, Frankie Andrianto, and Fadil himself would go through every lodging in case there were workers who saw where Hendra and Nanning went.
Ayo. Mending aku ikut Fadil, Breng.
When he arrived at one of the lodgings, Fadil was invited inside, supposedly because they wanted Fadil to help them. But once inside, the person who invited Fadil was apparently hiding inside the closet, because it turned out the person outside earlier wasn't human, but a large black horned figure. And this is what happens. Frankie and Andrianto started sweeping through several places, looking for Hendra's whereabouts. But when they were shouting, calling the names of their two friends, they instead came across a figure like this. After dealing with the ghost with the damaged face, they were again disturbed by the mental hospital ghost. Even though they ran everywhere, the ghost still stayed in front of them. And when Frankie tried to communicate with the ghost instead wet itself and...
Permi. Kok demi teh ngompol wi?
By chance, Frankie met Fadil, who was about to go to Bajina's place, so they decided to just go with Fadil, because indeed only Fadil was the bravest person among them.
Yaudah, yang penting kita jangan mencar lagi ya.
Right after Hendra and Nanning returned the gold they had stolen, Enda and Wati just arrived and immediately handed over the remaining gold that had fallen from Nanning's hands. Wati, who saw her future husband Hendra really stealing, of course became very angry because she thought that what Hendra did was solely so that they could have the celebration.
Kenapa harus nyuri, Mas? Mas, kita gak usah bikin hajatan, gak popo, Mas.
Hendra could only hang his head, feeling weak as Wati scolded him, especially after Bajina asked what Hendra was actually doing in this place with Nanning. So Nanning, who was already very heavily traumatized by the earlier events, decided to tell the truth, which turned out to be...
Apa yang sudah kalian lakukan pada malam pertama? Kami...
On the first night at the factory, Hendra and Nanning sneaked into the warehouse without realizing that the place they went to was the most sacred, especially since their intention for coming there was to do something that is strictly forbidden by religion. Angry but doing nothing, the group of spirits from Edo Tensei seemed to watch from behind, and after everything was over, Nanning began walking toward the statue, breaking the barrier between the two worlds, then took the gold from the treasure chest and immediately left from there carrying all that gold.
Ning, Mas, jangan diambil.
The story, of course, made everyone very angry. Naning tried to beg Wati for forgiveness, but Wati, who still couldn't accept the recent reality, chose to leave from there without anyone accompanying her. So guess what happens? Yes, Wati was possessed by the Demon Queen, and after hearing a loud laugh from the factory, Enda and the others immediately followed, afraid something might happen to Wati. But it was too late, really too late. They were no longer connected to Wati, but to the Demon Queen, who was now ordering her spirit army to gather in this place. With the command that went rat-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, the spirit army began to gather by possessing every factory worker without exception, where they started going crazy, eating glass and ashes, which of course is impossible for ordinary humans to do. Bahjina herself tried to fight the queen, but no one knew what happened. Enda was instead possessed by another figure, namely the puppeteer, and began performing her role just like a real puppeteer.
Oh, ilaheng alas gung liwang liwung.
Enda was taken to another place and shown a wayang performance. And after seeing the wedding procession, Enda decided to join the procession and saw the sacrificed bride and groom being buried right in the middle of the sugarcane field. After the sacrifice was over, Enda and the other workers finally regained consciousness on their own. Elder Gina immediately took Hendra and Naning to a place, accompanied by Enda and the others, where the Elder Gina explained that they now had to perform a sacrificial ceremony to calm the anger of the Demon Queen, and that Hendra and Naning were the couple who would become the offerings in this ceremony.
Mereka harus disiapkan menjadi mantan tebu.
Bantu saya menyiapkan arak-arakan.
Unable to do anything, Hendra and Naning began to be dressed like a bride and groom, while the elder prepared the procession and the ritual site, which would later be used for the sugarcane wedding ceremony.
Pasang manusia diarak untuk dikuburkan di ladang tebu.
Semoga ini yang terbaik.
After the performer started the drumming, the elder began to be possessed and performed kudelumping as well as debu in a scene like this. Enda, Fadl and Andriana went to watch the sugarcane wedding ceremony, and after Elder Gina asked for forgiveness from the Demon Queen, she immediately threw the brides, which was a doll, because it turned out the real brides were still at home, waiting for the ceremony to be finished. Before the ceremony took place, Elder Samin had already taken Hendra and Naning's blood and smeared it on the doll, hoping the Demon Queen would be fooled and think that the doll was the real brides. Still in the middle of the ritual, Fadil and the others returned to the lodgings to see whether Hendra and Naning were still there or not, because the two of them were now placed inside a circle of salt and were strictly forbidden to leave it. In the middle of the ritual, a strong wind suddenly blew and entered the lodgings, hitting the door of the room where Hendra and Naning were standing, and you can see. And yes, after a long effort to open it, the door finally opened, and everyone was so shocked when they saw that inside the circle of salt, it was no longer Naning and Hendra, but the doll that Elder Gina had prepared earlier to replace the real brides. Quickly, Fadil and the others went to the ritual site and immediately dug up the ground that was almost closing over the whole hole, but it was too late, because Hendra and Naning could no longer be saved. Feeling deceived, Elder Gina and Samin, who were the masterminds behind this trick, experienced something strange, where Elder Gina was immediately possessed by the demon queen, who said that their efforts would only end in vain because they would never be able to deceive the demon queen.
Manusia tidak dapat memperdaya Sang Maharato.
The incident last night forced the manager lady to close her factory and send all the workers home, even though they had only worked for a few days. On the way, Fadil, who kept watching Nunning, was instead shocked by an apparition behind Nunning. Elder Gina and Samin went back to perform the ritual at the place where Nunning first saw the performance, but again and again, the offerings they had prepared were never taken by the demon. Then the warehouse door suddenly closed by itself, and this is what happens. The end. Unbelievable ending. The movie teaches that power without justice will always oppress. Greed only brings destruction, and the small people will become strong when united. Change only happens when there is courage to speak up, and in the end, every inhuman treatment will return to hit its perpetrator. I'm Jack, along with the entire Stay Weird crew. Thank you so much for your attention, and see you in the next video. Adios.